Product leadership is not really about product, it's not about process, and it's not about all the things that product teams execute on. It's about people. You need the right people with the right skills to create a truly successful team. And all the people on your team should have a set of complementary skills. Earlier, when I spoke about the company I started, Train Simple, I alluded to the fact that I wasn't an expert in business or design or technology, but I assembled a team of individuals that possessed those qualities, and it was my job to make sure that they worked well together. And to be honest, it's not unusual for product managers to suffer from imposter syndrome, from the sheer fact that you most likely won't be an expert in any one of those areas and regularly encounter people who are. Remember, you're the conductor of the orchestra. That means not only do you want to find people that possess these skills, but you also want to consider their work experience, industry knowledge, life experiences, culture, and how all of those things complement others on your team. Product management is really about empathy for your users. And the more diverse the team is, the more empathy you'll have for your users, as their background will change their context on how they empathize with the user. Marty Kagan, who is really an icon in modern product management, and I encourage you to seek out books, articles, videos, or anything else he's put out to help guide you in your journey in product management. He once said, if you're only using your engineers to code, you're only getting half their value. And that's really true for all in your team. Don't just use your designers for design work. The key is to bring them all together in one cross-functional team and enable them to participate in the discovery process. By having one cross-functional team, you won't need to rely on a separate or shared development, design, or marketing teams to help execute your vision. If you did, you would run into competing priorities, which always creates friction, and that sets you up for less than the best results. So again, you want to build a diverse team with individuals that have different areas of expertise, different backgrounds, and work in different functions, but are all part of one team to work together to solve the problems your product is facing. And that's not the only way to build a team, but it has proven to be successful historically. The product lifecycle shouldn't be confused with the product development process, which we'll talk about next. Here, we're talking about the lifecycle of the product itself. The lifecycle is how a product progresses through its life, kind of like a person. You start with a fetus, then a baby, then the baby grows into a child, then into an adolescent, then an adult, and then finally an elderly person. The same is true for a product. The product has 5 steps in its life cycle. First, the development step. This is obviously the phase or stage where an organization spends time to develop a product to bring it to market. If we were talking about a person, this would be the fetus stage. In this phase, you can expect to encounter a lot of costs without generating any revenue because the product hasn't been released. But a good deal of time will be spent on market research, refining your concept, developing a strategy for launch, and an awful lot of testing. Next, introduction. The product has been developed and released into the world. It's the baby phase. A good amount of effort will be spent on marketing the product to build awareness. The results here will vary based on the complexity of the product and the competition and how innovative the product is. Hopefully, the marketing will prove to be successful and you can move on to the next phase, growth. In the growth phase, you've gained traction. Users have embraced your product. You're starting to see demand, and demand means revenue and profit. This also means new competitors begin to emerge to disrupt your success. In the growth phase, your marketing efforts change to establish brand presence versus product awareness. You'll also begin to add new features, open new distribution channels, and whatever helps scale your product. Eventually, you'll move into the next phase, maturity. Sales will begin to level off, not decline, but they'll still be steady. You'll no longer enjoy the growth you once experienced. It's important to continue to improve your product, to differentiate it from the competition, and marketing should focus on that differentiation. You'll need brand awareness, competitive pricing, excellent customer support and service, and continual product improvement to avoid the last phase, decline. If you find that you have too much competition for products that solve similar problems as your product, you may enter the final stage, which is decline. Maybe your product isn't as viable as it once was, or there's new, more innovative products in the marketplace, or perhaps your brand has become damaged for some reason. You'll have to make decisions about the product in the decline phase. One option is to extend or redesign the product, try new pricing strategies, launch a new version, or move into a new product category altogether. Sometimes the option is to discontinue the product and move into something new altogether. Think about the iPod. Apple came out with several versions adding features to extend its life, but ultimately it came to the conclusion that it was no longer a viable product. The iPhone essentially replaced it. There's no timetable on how these products progress through the life cycle. The typewriter, for example, went through these phases over 200 plus years. MySpace went through the life cycle in about 4 years. But the typewriter did evolve. Here's one from the 1930s and another from the 90s, which is more modern and electric. And remember, the typewriter was a product inspired from the printing press. It's not uncommon for product ideas to come from extending or improving upon existing commercial products. So many factors play a role in a product's life cycle. Ease of entry, technology advancements, economic conditions, rate of market acceptance, and others. Again, there's no standard here, but the more you can improve and innovate on your product, the longer it can stay in the growth and maturity phases of the life cycle. I'm going to be honest. The process you take in which you build product will vary from company to company and from leader to leader. There isn't an industry standard process per se, but there's certainly some common themes and phases a product will go through, and we'll talk about those here. Each of these phases contributes to the overall success of a product, and each comes with its own unique set of challenges. But remember, going through a process will give you the best chance of creating something that your customers will fall in love with. I'll go through these in order, but no, nothing in product ever happens linearly. You'll loop through each of these phases throughout the entire process. So first, we'll talk about discovery. Here, a product manager will begin talking to customers, listen to their feedback, talk to them about competing products that they may currently be using. This will give you an idea of what features interest them. Remember, discovery is not about asking users or customers what they want, but rather an understanding of challenges they face, the problems they encounter. Understanding this allows you to design and develop solutions that solve for those challenges and those problems. Another phase is ideation or product definition. Here, the main focus is trying to determine what a minimal viable product or MVP could look like. In order to figure out what an MVP should be, you'll want to establish a system that works for you and your team. Keep in mind that an MVP is not a finished product. In fact, you'll rarely ever classify a product as finished. It's a living project that will go through multiple iterations, improving the product and its features over time. I mention this because it's important not to overthink or over-worry about an MVP. You should expect your MVP to get trashed in feedback sessions with your customers. But with an MVP, you want to establish an achievable set of objectives and key results that you can hit in a given time frame. Get it done sooner rather than later. The MVP should demonstrate that you have the solution to the problem. It should help you establish product market fit. And once it does those two things, you need to design the product. Here, the product manager works with the design team to create wireframes and mock-ups. You'll meet with customers to see what parts of the design works and what doesn't. You'll continue to repeat the process until the product is clearly defined and solves the problems the customers are facing. Another key in this stage is to develop a roadmap. A roadmap is a visual display of the product vision. They sometimes have a bad reputation and get blamed for unrealistic deadlines, missing opportunities, or prioritizing out-of-date features. All this can be true, but like your MVP, you should expect your roadmap to be challenged. Think of it as a prototype of your product strategy. It's an opportunity to align your vision with all stakeholders, meaning all parties involved with the product: customers, engineering, marketing, executives, and anybody else. Once you have a design, you can move to the next phase, implementation or development. And you guessed it, this is where you actually build the product. Here, the product manager prioritizes features, creates product specifications, all the while keeping an eye on budget and economic conditions. A project manager will help to make sure everything stays on schedule. When the product is developed, tested, and ready for deployment, the next phase is marketing. And it's not to say that marketing starts now. The marketing team should be involved from the first phase. A product marketing manager could work alongside or under a product manager. There is a possibility for a big announcement at an industry event, but in many cases, a simple and direct campaign tends to work best. Now, there might be a training phase somewhere after design, but at this point, when the design and development phases are complete and the marketing campaign is underway, you're ready for the last phase, launch. Potential customers start using the product and potentially supported by a customer success team. Marketing is in full swing. The product is done, right? Well, not exactly. Remember, a product is never done. You'll start this process all over again. You'll talk to customers and users, see what works and what doesn't. You'll add new features to the roadmap, tweak things that might need adjustment, and maybe lose some features that just aren't working or resonating with users. Remember, these phases are the classic steps in product development. It's very possible that you'll find in your organization it has a different philosophy or a different approach. But as you start working as a product manager, these phases can work as a great guide to get you started. Okay, so we spent some time reviewing what the product development process might look like, but here's the thing. There's no shortage of different ways that you can approach how you run product. You can use the phases we talked about earlier, or you can incorporate different steps from different processes. But at the end of the day, you need to decide what works best for you. I know that may sound ambiguous, but it's important when developing a product to have flexibility to make sure the process works for your product that you're developing. One of the most common methodologies was introduced by Eric Ries, which is talked about in detail in this book, The Lean Startup, which I have right here. Lean Startup is a method to drive startups and products to grow with maximum acceleration. Now, okay, I'm not suggesting that the ideas here are completely original and came out of nowhere. They didn't. But what Eric describes here worked really well for startups in the digital age, creating software or digital products. And a key takeaway from this framework is to work quickly and efficiently. It's not about being cheap, but it is about being less wasteful while still working on big ideas. As you can see, the phases in the Lean Startup aren't wholly unique from what I described earlier. First, you target a customer. Next, you identify underserved customer needs. Then you define your value proposition, specify your MVP feature set, create a prototype, and then you test with customers. Ultimately, lean product development is about quickly finding product market fit by building MVPs and quickly getting customer feedback. Again, not outrageously different from what we discussed in the previous clip. Admittedly, the product world is filled with different ways of approaching innovation by using different systems with nuanced differences. Now, when it comes to actually developing the product, you'll commonly be working with an agile software development team using agile frameworks like Scrum and Kanban. More on that next. It might be easy to make the assumption that Agile software development is an approach to develop software in a more flexible or nimble way. And sure, that assumption works, but it doesn't really mean anything. To truly understand what Agile is, you need to have an understanding of what Agile was trying to fix. If we go back to the 1950s all the way through the 1990s, there were common software development problems that we encountered again and again. This development practice used a highly formalized, highly structured approach that had a sequential set of different stages, each run by their own siloed teams. And when each stage of the project was completed, the results coming from that phase would then flow down to the next phase and the next team. This is now something that we call waterfall development. The problem with this rigid approach is that the development teams would spend an enormous amount of time gathering project requirements and documenting those requirements in excruciating detail. This stage had to be finished before moving on to the next stage, architecture. The architecture stage, the team would rely on the documentation from the previous stage, and here they would define the technical aspects of exactly how this software was going to be built. And again, they would document it. For the next team to get started, they would need that documentation from the previous team. In this third stage, programmers would finally start writing software. When that was done, it would move into a testing stage, and then finally a deployment stage. And remember, each of these stages were governed by siloed, independent teams. This process could take several months and most likely years. There was minimal customer involvement, and as you can imagine, when software was finally released, bugs would most likely be found that were missed in testing, and the customer's requirements most likely would have changed from when they started to originally work on the project. And as you can imagine, the waterfall approach was not good at going backwards up the waterfall, through all those steps and through all those teams. So updates and improvements would have to go through the entire process all over again. So developers and businesses started looking for a better way to plan and deploy software projects, to be faster, more flexible, more responsive, a more agile approach. So in early 2001, 17 people, well-known, well-respected developers and authors working on software best practices, got together and wrote the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. Now, manifesto sounds a little intimidating, but it's not. The Agile Manifesto fits on one page, and it's simply a set of values and principles. And okay, values and principles sounds a little ambiguous as well, but here it's very specific. The Agile Manifesto was and is 4 values and 12 principles written in plain, non-technical language. So, what's the difference between a principle and a value? Well, the values come first. They lead to the principles. Values are that high level, well, what do we value? What do we think is most important about software development? Then the principles become the more practical, okay, if this is what we value, how do we make that happen? And again, these values are all in plain, non-technical language. What do they look like exactly? Well, we'll look at that next. We're not going to go through each of the values in every single one of the 12 principles. We don't need to. I do encourage you to read them in your own time. As far as the values, each is written as a comparison, a contrast between two things. We prioritize this above that. Let's look at one example. It's not just we value working software, but we value working software over comprehensive documentation. So this value recognizes that the waterfall project's approach often encouraged an over-focus on exhaustive documentation, where more effort, more time, and more attention was placed on that instead of actual software development. But the key here is prioritization. It's not saying don't document anything. It's simply saying working software should be prioritized over documentation. Let's look at 2 principles. Our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software, and also deliver working software frequently, from a couple of weeks to a couple of months, with the preference to the shorter timescale. So just these two alone is a huge perspective shift from waterfall. Here, we're seeking direct and continuous input from the customer, and to support these principles requires us to take an iterative and incremental approach. Instead of long, massive phases of waterfall, we assume here that we'll have multiple cycles where each cycle involves aspects of requirements, planning, implementing, testing, and deploying, and then start that cycle all over again. And importantly, we're delivering something valuable, something the customer can try and test and give feedback on every time. As you work with your development teams, you can see that agile software development mirrors how you'll be working on the product. Release products sooner, get feedback and make improvements, and then release again. It's important not to think of agile as a methodology. It's not. It doesn't provide a series of steps. It's simply a way to look at how to manage software projects. That being said, some do look for more structure around agile. This is where popular frameworks like Scrum and Kanban can help. Scrum is the most popular agile framework. The name of this framework comes from the sport rugby, where a scrum is a way players have to quickly pack together to take possession of the ball and then restart play. This framework is similar in that it requires team members to group together before breaking apart to work on tasks. Scrum is considered a lightweight framework, meaning it's easy to implement with few rules and plenty of flexibility. It does, however, have some distinct characteristics. A cornerstone of the Scrum framework is breaking down large, complex elements of a project into bite-sized, manageable pieces. Teams work in time-boxed periods, typically 1 to 4 weeks. These work periods are referred to as sprints. The sprint makes the overall project more manageable. It also allows teams to deploy work faster and frequently. And because you work in defined periods of time, teams then have the flexibility to adapt and change. Scrum also has some important meetings, sometimes referred to as ceremonies, that happen within each sprint. They are sprint planning, daily scrums, sprint review, and a sprint retrospective. Often used in combination with Scrum is another popular framework called Kanban. Kanban is a Japanese word for signboard, or at least that's what it roughly translates to. And this definition is key to what Kanban is all about. Kanban allows you to visualize your work, which promotes transparency across the team, and it helps you understand what you're working on and how it fits into the bigger picture. Kanban's claim to fame is the Kanban board, which uses cues that guide you on what to work on, when to work on it, and what's next. The board consists of visual cards that represent your to-do items in the product backlog. A backlog is a list of work based on the project's requirements. The board is divided up into several columns, and you place the cards into the columns based upon that item's current step in the workflow. The cards on the board make your project's progress visible and easy to identify what's being worked on, what's been completed, and what's going to be worked on next. To ease inefficiencies and to ensure things continue to move smoothly, Kanban limits the number of items that can occupy any one step at a time. These are called work in progress or WIP limits. The number again is up to you, but keep in mind, you want to set a WIP limit to a value that ensures a consistent delivery of items. If you run into issues, it'll be easily identified, as cards won't be allowed to move to the next column, creating a holdup or a bottleneck. This bottleneck will be a sign for the team to swarm around the blockers to resolve them, restoring the flow of the work across the board. Scrum and Kanban are two frameworks that work really well together. Scrum adds a layer of structure for organizing how the team collaborates, and Kanban offers a clear window into the work in progress and easily identifies trouble spots.